Super Rugby 2023, folks. How is the gap between the Australian sides and the New Zealand sides? We will go through a few factors today, and you guys can let us know your thoughts on what you reckon about the kind of Aussie-Kiwi rivalry in Super Rugby. Cheers to Simon for sending this idea through. Simon's on Patreon, so if you want to check out Patreon, link in the description. Helps keep the channel alive, folks. But yeah, 2020 through 2022. Remember, folks, Super Rugby in its first kind of Pacific season was still affected by some COVID. The tail end of COVID was still kind of wreaking havoc a little bit with the season. And there's two teams I haven't got on the board who were, I think, even more disrupted than the other teams. That's the Fijian Drua and Moana Pacifica. Now, we're looking at Australia and New Zealand head-to-head here, but definitely the Drua had to play all their games for the most part. I think one game in Fiji, but the rest of them in Australia last year. And we've seen what a kind of fortress Fiji has been for the Drua. So that's one big change between the seasons. Moana Pacifica had a bunch of COVID disruptions in their season. I remember a couple of their games kind of had to be rejigged where they ended up playing back-to-back games. 3 games in 2 weeks basically. So not the ideal season for them. Not that their 2023 season went better with kind of a proper fixtures list. But anyway, 2023 seems to have been kind of more of what we expect to see from Super Rugby going forward in terms of an average fixtures list. Now, is there much difference between last year and this year in terms of the team's performances? If you're just looking at which teams made the knockout stages, it's almost exactly the same. The same 3 Australian teams make the knockout stages, and the Reds, the Brumbies, and the Tars. And only one Aussie team makes the semis, that's the Brumbies. Pretty much exactly the same as last year. Whereas for the New Zealand sides, it was 5 sides in 2022. It's only the 4 sides in 2023, with the Highlanders dropping out of the top 8, but not being replaced by an Australian team, but rather being replaced by the Drua. As I said, with their home games actually at home, I think we saw a bit of a difference there. So certainly the Drua nicked some results this year that they may not have done last year. Now, what about the sides? I mean, most of the sides finished with pretty similar records to last year. The Crusaders and the Blues actually had slightly worse records than the previous year, although the Chiefs basically took that Blues record and swapped it with them. The Canes got one more win. Remember, they lost to Moana Pacifica last year, whereas they didn't this year. And then the Highlanders, despite missing the 8, actually finished with one more win than the previous year. For the Aussie side, it's only the Force with their home form that managed to get a better record than the previous year. The Rebels and the Brumbies were the same, and the Reds and the Tars slightly worse, remembering the Drua certainly took more results from both New Zealand and Aussie sides than they did the previous year. But what about kind of head-to-head? Did the Australian teams win more games in 2023 compared to 2022 when playing New Zealand opponents? The answer is no. They won 7 in 2022, 5 in 2023. I think the Brumbies had 3 wins in 2022, and then it was the other sides, barring the Reds, that got 1 apiece. Whereas it was a similar thing in 2023, with the Brumbies getting 2, and then the Waratahs, Rebels, and Force each getting the 1. Not the Rebels, it was the Reds. The Reds with their result over the Chiefs. It was the Waratahs, the Force, and the Reds getting 1 each. And the Rebels kind of going winless against Kiwi opponents. That Reds one is a pretty famous one now, given the Chiefs only dropped that 1 win all season. So it's not a huge difference from 7 to 2, but it is still a drop. Now, in my mind, I was thinking, I feel like the Aussie sides are a bit closer. And I think I may know the reason why my gut was going that way, and it's because the number of 50-plus results, where a New Zealand side just went and put half a hundy on the Aussie sides, did drop from 6 to 2. So it's a lot less compared to the previous year. I mean, the Blues still gave the Rebels an absolute hiding, 54-17 over in Melbourne, which was pretty embarrassing. But overall, the number of games where the New Zealand side, just as I said, put a huge scoreline on, did reduce. But on the flip side of that, the number of points, like the average points difference between the New Zealand side and the Aussie side, has actually ever so slightly increased from 10 to 13. So the gap between the Aussie sides and New Zealand sides, just in pure scoreboard terms, has broadened a wee bit. It was marginal, like 34-24 was last year, 36-23 is this year. So that's still kind of within margin of error territory. You're looking at 1 penalty kick on the board, a missed conversion here or there, adds up for a bit. But yeah, it's kind of a hard one to get my head around. Do I feel like the Aussie sides have gotten that much kind of closer? Have the New Zealand sides gotten further away? It feels kind of much of a muchness. There's not a heck of a lot of difference. The win-loss is pretty similar. The 50-point games, I'm pleased that's come down, because that doesn't necessarily mean the margin was closer. It just means the New Zealand sides weren't able to rack up as many points in individual games. Defence kind of less optional in 2023. And yeah, the margin's slightly extended. But yeah, you guys let us know what you reckon. I feel like the Force were definitely a better side. I feel like the Rebels had a lot of potential. I feel like the Tars started well but finished all right, despite the fact that they went out in the quarters in a bit of a limp way. The Brumbies still look the business of all the Aussie sides, and the Reds will be getting a rejig next year with a new coach. And then the New Zealand sides, with the Crusaders getting a new coach, the Hurricanes getting a new coach, the Blues getting a new coach. It's potentially one that gets a wee bit squeezed in 2024, but we will have to wait and see. You guys let us know what your thoughts are. Do you reckon the comp will get a bit closer? Does it need to have that bit of parity? We do have one Aussie side in the semi-finals, which is probably better for the comp, even if that Hurricanes-Brumbies game has gone down kind of controversially here in New Zealand. But yeah, you guys let us know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.